cash in the coffers to save the gain. A sharp shock for parts of Otago, with electricity line prices set to climb 60% plus. Hold the eggs, New South Wales gets extra COVID restrictions for Easter. Fade to black for one of Christchurch's last DVD stores. Cornwall Park's cows are on the move, but plans to export them live have some people in a tailspin.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Some lawyers are questioning ACC's denial of cover to women who suffer the most common type of childbirth-related injury. Cover of perineal tears has fallen dramatically since last June, when ACC found its former policy was more generous than legally required. Anusha Bradley reports.
ACC says under the law it can only cover perineal tears if they're the result of a treatment injury or a failure to provide treatment. But lawyer Maria Bagnall says the policy is too restrictive and women may be missing out on cover they're entitled to. Another lawyer, Phil Schmidt, believes ACC's stance is based on an interpretation of a 2017 Court of Appeal ruling. He says the need to prove there's a treatment failure before giving cover contradicts a 2005 law change and should be challenged. Ko Anusha Bradley aho.
The government is going back to the drawing board on the Auckland Light Rail project, which had to be shelved last year when coalition partner New Zealand First refused to support it. Transport Minister Michael Wood says a working group has been given 6 months to develop a new business case for it. He says he understands the public is frustrated by the lack of progress on the project.
Well, look, no one is keener to progress this progress as quickly as possible than I am. As a person who lives in Auckland, who experiences the challenges of traffic every day that I'm here, who lives in the area, who represents the area, I want to see this project move forward, but we do have to take a little bit of time up front to engage with people and get it right.
Michael Wood says once the group's advice is received at the end of the year, key decisions will be made. The Mayor of Central Otago is calling on the government to offer some of the newly available MIQ spaces to seasonal foreign workers. In an open letter to ministers, Tim Cadogan says his region's horticulture industry is desperate for workers, and letting in foreigners under the RSE scheme would bring huge relief.
When I'm seeing people who have been a lifetime in the industry crying because things are getting that tight, when I'm seeing the desperation that I'm seeing and hearing the stories I'm hearing, yeah, it's now. And the solution, potentially, again, I emphasise, if New Zealanders can use those beds, then my view is, OK, that's fine. But if those beds sit empty when there is such an urgent need, that would be a crying shame.
Tim Cadogan, MIQ authorities have been urging people to return to New Zealand to snap up a sudden glut of vacancies next month. A tourism fund to help local councils build infrastructure for visitors is set to be reopened. The government says the Tourism Infrastructure Fund will now be prioritised for regions hardest hit by the fallout from COVID-19. Money from the fund was last allocated to councils in November 2019. The move has been warmly welcomed by Westland Mayor Bruce Smith, who says it will help future-proof the regions.
The other thing it does is it creates small construction jobs, putting pipes in the ground, perhaps water supplies. It creates employment for an area that desperately needs it. And so I was delighted to see the announcement come through. Absolutely delighted.
Between $13 and $18 million will be allocated for the new round of funding. A reckless Lime scooter rider who collided with a woman getting off a bus has been ordered to pay her $4,000 in reparation. In the Auckland District Court today, Mitchell McIntyre was found guilty of careless or inconsiderate use of a vehicle in 2019. The woman hit, 65-year-old Deborah Christensen, questions how anyone could be so reckless.
The Lime scooter hit me at approximately 28 kilometres an hour at a busy Franchell Street, and it turned me into a human spear where I ended up flying through the air and ending up face down on the pavement under the bus.
Deborah Christensen suffered concussion and contusions and lacerations to her face and body. It's 5 minutes past. The Highlanders have dropped 6 players for Friday's Super Rugby Aotearoa match against the Crusaders for disciplinary reasons, but they're not saying what the players did. All Black Josh Ioane is among those dropped. Coach Tony Brown says they've broken team protocols but won't elaborate. The White Ferns might be on the verge of a T20 series win over Australia, but they're otherwise poor form this summer appears to have taken its toll on skipper Sophie Devine. She missed the side's nail-biting last ball win over Australia last night, having pulled out of the match just hours before it started. New Zealand Cricket has confirmed today that Devine is suffering from fatigue. With series losses to England and Australia already this season, her captaincy has come under pressure with calls for her to stand down, but she has stood firm, saying she intends to stay in the job. Coach Bob Carter says Devine remains with the side, but no decision has been made on whether she will play in tomorrow night's decider in Auckland. He says at times like this, cricket must come second. The 5 New Zealand cities hoping to host the 2023 Women's Football World Cup matches will learn overnight whether they have been successful. Australia and New Zealand will jointly host the 32-team tournament, with Sydney already confirmed for the final. Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, Hamilton and Wellington are in line to host matches. That's the news.
New mothers are left in the lurch.
They're home with a baby, they're not getting enough sleep, we worry about postpartum depression, and now on top of that they're dealing with a really painful perineum.
A scathing review of Tauranga's infrastructure.
The last 20 years there's been very little investment in making this a big city with the big city amenities.
And the Ports of Auckland's put on notice.
The culture will and must change. If the board does not produce those results, then I would be looking to change the board.
Watch this space. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Auckland showers, some possibly heavy and thundery, mainly in the afternoons. Waikato to Manawatu, periods of rain, heavy with possible thunderstorms, easing tonight but becoming heavier again tomorrow afternoon. For Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers possibly thundery, clearing overnight but returning tomorrow afternoon with possible thunder again. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson, Buller and Marlborough, periods of rain with heavy and possibly thundery falls, clearing from the south tomorrow afternoon. For Canterbury, drizzle turning to rain tonight, then clearing from the south tomorrow to fine weather. Otago and Southland, cloud and isolated showers clearing tonight, becoming fine. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, but rain tonight north of Hokitika. Chatham Islands, cloudy with occasional rain, heavy and possibly thundery tomorrow around midday. RNZ National at 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa. Just bugger off. That blunt message to Ports of Auckland bosses from an advocate for Māori. Mayor Phil Goff commissioned a report that's found systemic failings in the company's health and safety practices, with suspected underreporting of accidents, with workers fearing retaliation if they raise concerns. It also calls for the port to put safety ahead of profits. CEO Tony Gibson says he'll stay on to push through the changes, despite the report laying much of the blame for failings at the feet of management. Tau Henare is the Deputy Chair of the Māori Statutory Board that advises Auckland Council on issues affecting Māori. He wants the big bosses at Ports of Auckland gone.
You have the victims' families saying basically the same thing as the report. Then it's time for, in my opinion, and it's what I will be saying to my board at our next board meeting, that both the Chief Executive Officer, Tony Gibson, and the Chair should stand down forthwith. Somebody needs to take responsibility. Instead of the continued yearly palaver that we get from them that they're making headway, well, it's time for that headway to stop and get in some real people who know the business, who know what needs to be done, and instill some confidence from the workers in the management. If that had been a worker, they'd be down the road in 5 seconds.
So Tony Gibson's been there for some time. The board chair has not, a recent arrival. You still think he should be rolled?
Of course he should. I mean, he's the chairman of the board, for goodness sake. I mean, I don't know where we are with, prioritising responsibility. But when, and I suppose I take it from my own experience. Yeah, when you're the chair, when you're the chief exec, the buck should stop right there. And, especially if you're getting paid close to $1 million a year to do a job that somebody could do for 100 to 200K a year.
Tony Gibson said yesterday that he feels a moral obligation to stay on and put things right, and that he was sickened by the contents of the report. Why doesn't he deserve the chance to do that, to put it right?
But he's had his chance. After the first one, after the first incident, nothing changed. Then the second incident comes along and nothing changes. How many times do people have to be buried for him to get his ass into gear?
The report identified systemic problems with health and safety, a culture of fear, under-reporting. I spoke to Tony Gibson in December last year, and I asked him at that time why he thought that might be the case. And I just want to play you just a little bit of that exchange.
We want them to feel safe. They have to feel safe.
So why don't they feel safe to speak up? Isn't that an issue with your culture and environment?
Yes, and I recognise that there has been an issue around our safety culture, which we are addressing.
So why are they unable to speak up?
Well, they could be cultural issues.
What do you mean by cultural issues?
Well, cultural issues, we have a large Pacific Island Maori community, and very often they are what I would call shy in coming forward to address issues. We've spoken to them, and we want to ensure that through their leaders that they are and have an avenue to come through and express how they feel about safety.
Are they scared that they're going to lose their jobs if they do that?
No way, no way.
What do you make of that, Tau? Māori and Pacifica are too shy to speak up.
Well, it's interesting. Back in 2017, the Independent Māori Statutory Board and the Ports of Auckland agreed that by 2019 there would be a Māori responsiveness program established. Well, it's 2021 and they haven't done sweet FA about it. In fact, only a couple of days ago, we asked them, where's your Māori responsiveness report? And they're still working. They haven't even started it. We, in fact, after that meeting, sent them a template that they could use. For goodness sake, it's 2021. That's 3 or 4 years in the making, just getting to a sorry, we didn't do what we promised to do. But here's something really interesting. When last year we asked them who did they have, they had employed a person of Māori descent. They couldn't even tell us his or her name. This is just one of many issues that have culminated in excuse the word, a culture of non-responsiveness and non-responsibility. And it's time for these guys to walk out of the office, get in their flash cars, and just bugger off. And let somebody who knows what they are doing handle the move into the 21st century.
So this is a council-owned company, right? Your kaupapa as the Independent Māori Statutory Board is to, and I quote, advance the interests of Māori in Tamaki Makaurau. So how can you best do that in this very specific situation?
Well, how we do that is actually trying to work with them in coming up with a Māori responsiveness program that they promised that they would do by 2019.
And what would that do, Tau? What is a Māori responsiveness program?
Well, it's about working with, having the treaty as your base, and also working with the workers who obviously are Māori and also Pacific Island and also Pākehā people. But in our job, it is working with those Māori so that they feel safe, that they feel the Māori community feels safe. That what work have they done with Ngāti Whātua? What work have they done with the other 18 iwi in and around Tāmaki?
How well are they looking after their Māori workers, in your experience?
Look on a scale of 1 to 10, about a 1. I mean, there are deaths there, not just one, not just two, but also a poor person in the community who just happened to be on the water. You know, there's too many instances where boards and chief execs get away with, well, I hate to say it, murder.
Tau Henare, Deputy Chair of the Independent Māori Statutory Body, Tamaki Makaurau. It is almost 5:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the programme, All Blacks great Sean Fitzpatrick urges players to back the big money deal that would see a slice of the national game sold offshore. Some lawyers are questioning ACC's new policy covering the most common type of childbirth-related injury, saying many women could be missing out on cover they're entitled to. ACC's cover of perennial tears has fallen dramatically since the agency realised its former policy was more generous than legally required. Lawyers specialising in ACC law say the new guidance is too restrictive and may in fact be a result of wrongly interpreting the law. Anusha Bradley reports.
Severe perineal tears can cause pain, incontinence and prolapse issues. They can take years to heal and often require surgery and specialist pelvic physio. In June, ACC issued guidance saying that under the law, it can only cover perineal tears resulting from a treatment injury or a failure to provide treatment. This resulted in a number of successful claims dropping from about 30 a month to less than 4, leaving many women struggling to get the treatment they need. A solicitor at ACC litigation specialist John Miller Law, Maria Bagnall, says ACC's new policy is too restrictive and could put many women and their doctors off filing a claim they might actually be eligible for.
We're worried that they won't even think of challenging ACC when they sort of put this policy out saying they're not going to cover these types of injuries. And looking at the policy itself as well, it gives specific examples in there that there are many scenarios that women can make a treatment injury claim, and it's an incredibly complex area of law. And what needs to be looked at is the merits of the case itself, not a policy that ACC put out.
ACC says the new guidance was formulated by a panel of experts, including obstetricians, midwives and academics, and was issued after finding inconsistencies in how claims were being made between DHBs. It says a literature review and research into tears was also carried out as part of its decision. But ACC law specialist Phil Schmidt says ACC's stance appears to be based on an interpretation of a 2017 Court of Appeal ruling at one about treatment injuries.
ACC have interpreted this Court of Appeal decision to mean that all treatment injury must be failure-based. That largely makes the treatment injury regime pointless, because it was introduced to remove the need to prove failure. So if the way they're interpreting the court's decision is that you do need to prove a failure, then there was really no point. So from my point of view, ACC's approach to the treatment injury concept has really returned us back to the bad old days of having to prove fault.
Mr Schmidt says ACC's interpretation is also being applied to many other injuries and it should really be challenged in the courts, but that's very difficult and expensive to do. In a statement this afternoon, ACC acknowledges some women face severe physical and mental challenges as a result of perineal tears, whether or not they are eligible for cover. It says ACC considers each case based on its own evidence and in light of the legislation. Cover will be available for a treatment injury if the tear has been caused by treatment or a failure to provide appropriate treatment. ACC has revoked the cover of 2 women with perineal tear claims since toughening its stance on the issue, but the organisation says it's not planning to do a retroactive review of all claims as a result of last year's clarification. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
Auckland's Cornwall Park is facing criticism for a plan to export live cattle overseas. The park's facing public backlash after announcing some cows currently grazing in its fields will be shipped to Mongolia. The government has been reviewing live exports and Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she has significant concerns about the practice. Meanwhile, an Auckland councillor says she'll be seeking a please explain from the trust overseeing Cornwall Park. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Simon Rogers have this report.
It's the Cornwall cow controversy that has animal advocates in a spin. You can't miss them when you visit the suburban Auckland Park, docile Swiss breed cemental cattle chewing and chilling in lush paddocks. But some of this herd are set for the Seven Seas. They'll be exported live to Mongolia after being selected to help establish a breeding program for farmers there. Now, Cornwall Park management says this isn't the first time its cows have been on the move, saying they've completed live exports in the past, and locals are far from happy about it. Cornwall Park says it is proud to announce the cows' shift to Mongolia, but the backlash has been swift. Some took to social media to tell park management it should be ashamed, while others were calling the news extremely disappointing. Many say they don't agree with live exports, and now animal rights organisation SAFE is involved.
There's already a lot of outrage about live export and issues concerned with the journey that those animals are having to undertake, as well as the lack of transparency around what happens to those animals when they arrive at their destination countries.
That's SAFE Chief Executive Deborah Ashton. SAFE points out the government has been reviewing the live export trade since June 2019. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor has expressed his preference for a conditional ban on cattle exports. In October last year, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern admitted having significant concerns about live exports. Ashton says the Cornwall Park cattle face a long, rough journey in cramped, disgusting conditions before arriving in a country with high elevations and cold, dry conditions, a far cry from their current home.
They do need to consider the welfare of their animals when they get to Mongolia, and I would ask them, what do they actually know about the welfare conditions for these animals when they get there?
Checkpoint has seen correspondence between Cornwall Park and a member of the public confirming it has occasionally exported cows overseas in the past. It says the animals receive veterinary care while on board livestock vessels. But all of this is news to Maungakeke Tamaki Ward Councillor Josephine Bartley.
My reaction is one of horror, actually. I didn't realise we were still doing this, doing live exporting of animals, considering the effect it has on them and what they go through.
Councillor Bartley says Cornwall Park's involvement in live exports is a real concern.
Yeah, I'll be writing to their trust board for more information and asking them if they can just reconsider.
Checkpoint has made numerous attempts to get more information from Cornwall Park, but no one would front for an interview on camera or over the phone. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
Well, we've just received a statement from Cornwall Park management. It reiterates that their pleased cows from Central Auckland's only working farm have been selected to help establish a breeding program for farmers in remote areas of Mongolia. Park Director Michael Ayrton says the farm's team members have worked hard over many years to breed top-quality cemental cows. He says the park's cows have long been in demand by New Zealand farmers, wanting to improve the quality of their herds. Ayrton says breeding cows of the quality Cornwall Park produced were valuable animals and were cared for and treated as such. He says the park's board and management recognise that some people object to the idea of farming animals for food, and they respect the sincerity of those views. We are keen for your feedback on that one. What do you think about the Cornwall Park cows being shipped offshore? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. All Black great Sean Fitzpatrick reckons a massive multi-million-dollar deal to sell a chunk of New Zealand rugby offshore is the best they'll get, and without it the game is in dire straits. The $460 million deal would see US investment firm Silver Lake buy a 15% share in New Zealand rugby. In a letter to New Zealand Rugby, several high-profile past and current players say they'll block the deal because they're worried about it losing control. There's potential for cultural misappropriation, and there are other investment opportunities that they would like explored. A mediator's been called in to resolve the standoff between the two sides. But former AB's captain Sean Fitzpatrick is backing the deal.
I'm all for it because we need money. We need money to sustain the game the way we know it is.
Does Silver Lake look like the right partner? Does the deal look like the right deal?
Well, I think in terms of the money, the number they are proposing is as good as we'll get anywhere. I've actually spoken to the Silver Lake guys, 2 of them that are doing the deal. I spoke to Simon Patterson. I had a one-on-one with him. He's a rugby-loving guy from England, and they've got experience in private equity in sport. So I think they're as good as anyone.
So how do you know that the money's right? Because the market hasn't been tested. Someone could pay more for 15%. How do we know?
Because private equity has invested in Northern Hemisphere clubs and also the Six Nations. And the number they're talking is as good as anything. And that's and Lisa, there's no gauge on what is good and what's not good. You go and try and raise that sort of capital anywhere else in the world, and I'm sure you'll struggle to raise $450 million.
The things that Silver Lake are offering, as outlined in the players' letter to New Zealand Rugby, they're offering to increase the fan base, they're offering to execute core revenue strategies, sponsorship, and, well, getting more for media rights. None of it seems like brain surgery. So why can't New Zealand Rugby do that itself or through a subsidiary that it sets up?
Well, that's what I like about what the Players Association are asking. They're challenging the New Zealand Union, and that's good. But when you look at the hard facts, Silver Lake are very good at hiring the right people, and there's nothing to stop us going and hiring the right people. But why would you? In terms of what Silver Lake are doing already with sports franchises around the world, they are hiring people to do exactly what we want. And what we need, as you said, to grow that fan base.
So there is some resistance among the players. How do you talk them round?
I'd like to see the players more involved. I've been on many Zoom calls with past players, past All Black coaches, NZRFU, Silver Lake people, agents, and Players Association. Rob Nicol, David Kirk. What I'd like to see, and I sort of tend to disagree with what John Kerwin said, the players need to be involved. I want Sam Cane to be at the top table, although he's on the board of the Players Association. I haven't seen him at any of our meetings, in terms of the stakeholder meetings, that they need to be involved. They need to know exactly what is going on, as we did 25 years ago. When the game went professional, the players were hugely involved in that. Let's not forget, Lisa, that New Zealand Rugby and the Players Association are partners in this together. They shouldn't be fighting. They should be sitting around a table, as they are doing, I think, today and tomorrow, in mediation to try and get a deal together.
But what about the concerns that have been raised in the letter, right, from the players to New Zealand Rugby? Concerns about safeguarding the image of New Zealand Rugby, cultural appropriation, and basically selling a national treasure down the river. How do you safeguard against those concerns?
Because as the fabric of New Zealand is the grassroots of New Zealand. And at the moment, grassroots is hugely struggling. And we need money to fix it. So the challenge for New Zealand Rugby is, once they have the money, how are they going to use that money to fix the grassroots?
But aren't you selling the thing that makes the money, Sean? Aren't you selling the thing that makes the money? You're selling the fishing rod rather than the fish, aren't you, if you sell a 15% share?
Not at all, Lisa. We're selling expertise in terms of acquiring expertise to grow the game. That's what we need. We want children playing sport. We want them playing rugby, because the generation I grew up with sport was such a huge part of our community. The rugby club was a part of our community, and unfortunately at the moment we're losing that, and we need to get that back. And I'm not saying everyone has to play rugby. What I want is children to play sport. And if it's rugby they choose, that is fantastic.
The players have floated a couple of ideas as an alternative, which is New Zealand Rugby, as mentioned, setting up a subsidiary basically to do this work themselves and raise money, make money. With a loan, they're suggesting that the government could underwrite. The other option they're saying is sell bonds to the New Zealand public, own a bit of the All Blacks. Are any of the ideas they're floating workable?
I don't know. I don't know if that would work. If you buy a bond, Lisa?
Well, I think there potentially would be a lot of people out there who would. We'll ask them, but could those ideas work?
They could do, and they're asking the questions. I go back to what I said initially. It's what the Players Association is doing. They're asking the questions of New Zealand Rugby, which I'm sure Mark Robinson and his team will answer.
Is Silver Lake committed to Pacifica Rugby?
I would imagine they would be, yes. I haven't seen anything other than what you've read in the letter. You've seen where they're going in terms of, obviously, Australia is a target for them, and the Pacific Islands is also. So, yes, I would imagine a huge part. Pacifica Rugby is so good for our competitions, for our brand of style of rugby they play. It's paramount that they're involved at the top table.
So, in your view, is there no other option to saving grassroots rugby?
We need money, Lisa, to do that. That's the end game, because that is really struggling.
And so, without it, what do you see as the consequences without this deal?
Yeah, we will lose. We're going to lose players, our leading players. We won't be able to afford to keep them in New Zealand as we've done. New Zealand Rugby in the last 10 years has done a phenomenal job in keeping our leading players here in New Zealand playing for the All Blacks. Ultimately, they can't continue to do that because it's not sustainable the way rugby is at the moment.
Hey, do you feel like you're in the primaries for the presidential election here? No, seriously, are you out winning votes for this, Sean?
No, I'm not. Honestly, I'm very balanced. It's
not about not being balanced. It's not about not being balanced. You seem committed to this. So are you having any joy making the case to some of the other players or people who might be lukewarm on it?
I think it's a case of just talking to people, Lisa. And, I'm a massive fan of the All Blacks. I'm a huge fan of New Zealand Rugby, and I'm lucky that I was an All Black. So I've got a vested interest. The legacy of our organisation is phenomenal, and it's our job as custodians of the game to make sure that legacy continues. When you're an All Black, you're told, make sure you hand the jersey back in a better condition you found it in, and that's our job. And that's why I'm saying the current players need to understand what this game was all about going forward.
What do you think the New Zealand public will feel about a chunk of their national team, this treasure, being sold to an offshore company?
When you put it that way, it's quite telling. So we need to make sure that we're making the right choice.
What way do you think it's going to go? If you're a betting man,
I think ultimately over the next month, it's just going to play out, and I think they'll go with Silver Lake.
And that is former All Black Sean Fitzpatrick. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the government thaws off plans to create a new mega public broadcaster. The Mayor versus a Minister will go live to Wellington for a rally against sexual violence and roll the credits on one of Christchurch's last video stores. We would love your feedback. All Blacks, would you be prepared to buy bonds to get equity into New Zealand Rugby? Maybe $10-50 a bond? What do you reckon? Would you buy one? Why? Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Or Nicholas Poynton from Business reckons, what about black socks? That could be a good fundraiser. Our email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now, though, for the headlines with Susanna.
An advisor to the Auckland Council on issues affecting Māori says Ports of Auckland bosses need to be held accountable for the deaths of workers on their watch. Tau Henare says the chair and the chief executive should resign. He told Checkpoint that despite promising in 2017 to institute a Māori responsiveness program by 2019, port bosses did nothing about it. Some lawyers are questioning ACC's denial of cover to women who suffer from the most common type of childbirth-related injury. ACC says that under the law it can only cover perineal tears if they're the result of a treatment injury or a failure to provide treatment. But lawyer Maria Bagnall says the policy is too restrictive and women may be missing out on cover they're entitled to. The government is going back to the drawing board on the Auckland Light Rail project, which had to be shelved last year when coalition partner New Zealand First refused to support it. Transport Minister Michael Wood says a working group has been given 6 months to develop a new business case for it. He says he understands the public is frustrated by the lack of progress on the project, but time must be taken to get it right. The Mayor of Central Otago is calling on the government to let seasonal foreign workers take some of the MIQ spaces that have unexpectedly become available next month. Tim Cadogan says his region's horticulture industry is desperate for workers and letting in foreigners under the RSE scheme would bring huge relief. A reckless e-scooter rider who collided with a woman getting off a bus has been ordered to pay her $4,000 in reparation. In the Auckland District Court today, Mitchell McIntyre was found guilty of careless or inconsiderate use of a vehicle. Deborah Christensen told the court the collision turned her into a human spear. She flew through the air and landed face down under the bus. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And it's time now to go to the business news with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, let's talk about Mainzeal. OK, so this case has been rumbling on for a while and the Court of Appeal has released a decision, has it?
Really significant court ruling that comes through because of its implication that it will have for other business, but also the directors of companies in this country. As a reminder, this is one of the biggest insolvency cases in recent years. It centres on the construction company Mainzeal, went into liquidation in 2013. A case was brought by the liquidators against the 3 directors and the CEO, accusing them of reckless trading. And in 2019, the High Court found they breached their duties as directors, allowing the company to trade in 2011 while insolvent, really. The 3 directors were ordered, the 3 directors and the managing director, or the chief executive, were ordered by the High Court to pay damages of $36 million. And the directors, they appealed straight away. They said the decision was deeply flawed, that they were acting on the information that was available to them at the time. They felt that, hindsight had been unfairly applied to them, and they said that it would set a precedent that would deter anyone in this country from ever becoming a director on a company's board. At the same time, though, the liquidators, they cross-appealed. They felt like these damages weren't actually high enough. They wanted them to be doubled to about $72 million. So the Court of Appeal, there was a hearing last year for about 3 days or about a week, and then they've gone away, they've come back with their ruling, and the key point to take away is that they found the company's directors did breach their duties and traded recklessly as they exposed the people they owed money to significant losses. But crucially, the court says no loss occurred because of this decision, so on these grounds they threw out the need for the directors to pay $36 million in damages. But on top of that, though, the court found that the directors did breach another section of the Companies Act. It's a part of the Act that I've become increasingly familiar with today. And this related to the company taking out sort of millions of dollars in debt in 2011 at a time where they were not sure, or there was uncertainty about whether or not they could pay that money back. And for that, the Court of Appeal has sent the case back to the High Court so that they can determine the damages. And that's got the liquidators incredibly excited. I spoke to one of them today, and he believes that the damages will now be significantly higher as a result of this decision.
So this is kind of a be careful what you wish for, because you ask for a review, they find something else, and then you potentially are looking at a much bigger bill.
Look, that's one of the questions we could have put to the directors today, but unfortunately they declined to comment. But it's worth mentioning that the Court of Appeal has said in its ruling that the legislation governing insolvency trading is unsatisfactory. There is a need for a review. So across the board, there is plenty more to come on this. I'm sure there'll be more reaction from a lot of people in the business community about sort of maybe the need for a possible review.
Let's briefly touch on New Zealand king salmon. So had a bit of a tough first half.
Yeah, it's a company that's reported a half-year loss. It's one of those companies that really relies on its export business, exports salmon overseas, and because of the ongoing lockdowns in countries overseas, that's really flowed in and hurt their business. Now, it's posted a loss of about $7.1 million for the 7 months to January. That compares with about a $20.8 million net profit for the same comparable period, but the numbers aren't, strictly comparable because they've changed their balance dates. That's when they report. But essentially, the road ahead for the firm isn't going to be easy. It will be among these firms whose margins will be affected by higher freight and distribution costs, but they are banking on prices increasing towards the middle of the year. You'll probably see that linked to sort of the reopening of sort of the easing of lockdown restrictions around the world. So its share price is down about 1.3% or 2 cents to $1.50.
And let's gallop through the other numbers from the market.
The NZX is up nearly 1% or by about 114 points to 12,560. The dollar's at 69.8 US cents or 91.7 Australian as well.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with business news there. It is the Minister versus the Mayor. A war of words has broken out on social media over whether Napier is in the grip of a crime wave. Napier Mayor Kirsten Wise is calling for more police on the ground following recent gang-related violence, saying some people don't feel safe. But electorate MP and Minister Stuart Nash has fired back on social media, calling BS on comments made in support of the Mayor. He's also said he's never felt unsafe in the city. While joining us now is Mayor Kirsten Wise. Tell me, Mayor, what is it that you've said or done that seems to have got Stuart Nash so riled up?
Look, I wouldn't go so far as to say that there's a war of the words by any means, and he's clearly at the moment got a slightly different view to me about how our community is feeling. I'm in constant daily contact with members of our community, and they are feeling unsafe, and so I'm going to be ensuring that, I advocate on their behalf to our central government representatives.
So is Stuart Nash out of touch with reality on the ground there?
Oh, look, I'm not going to comment on that. He's got his views, and I'm sure that he's getting some people contact him that potentially feel otherwise, and all I can represent is the people that are contacting me. We're in the throes of our long-term plan consultation, and one of the key themes that has come through over the last sort of 6 to 8 months within that process is that there's a real sense from our community that they want us as a council to focus on community safety, and that's what we're intending to do.
Have there been more violent incidents and more crime, or is it just that there have been a few high-profile incidents?
There has definitely been an escalation in general in crime over recent years here in Napier, and there's a whole number of factors that are contributing towards that. And, our local police here are working as hard as they possibly can, and that's why I'm looking to central government to work in partnership with us to find some other solutions and provide some additional support.
So when you say that there has been, an increase, is that from anecdotal information, or do you have data to back that up?
There is data to back that up. So when you look at the national statistics at the moment, we're sitting a lot at the top, if not in the second position for the crime statistics and at a general level, and then when you drill down...
Are you talking about crimes per capita there, or...?
Yes,
right.
Yeah, that's correct. And then you drill down into family violence, drug issues, etc., and we're sitting at the top across all of those statistics, unfortunately.
So when Stuart Nash says he's never felt unsafe in the city and that people are not telling him that they feel unsafe, why do you think there are two completely different pictures relating to exactly the same area?
I have no idea. All I can reflect on is what I'm witnessing both personally myself, and the daily recounts and, stories and messages that I'm getting from our community members.
So I notice on Facebook, people have posted comments in support of you. The Minister has got on there and, he's responded to one person who was supporting you by calling BS on the comments made. Is that appropriate for a Minister, do you think?
Oh, look, all I can say is, personally, I wouldn't make a comment like that. But everyone has their own way of communicating, but personally, it's not something that I would be putting on social media.
Why is that? What's wrong with it?
Look, because everyone has their views and has the right to share what they're thinking and feeling about a certain situation or issue, and to have someone else essentially dismiss that is not acceptable as far as I'm concerned.
So what do you actually need? Because he is the electorate MP. What do you need from him?
Look, Stuart and I work alongside each other well. We've known each other for a number of years, and I have said to him we need to ensure that we're doing the absolute best we can possibly do for our local community with regards to not only this issue but any issue. And all I can do is share with him what I'm hearing, and then essentially, work with him to do the best for our community.
And have you shared your concerns with him directly?
Yes, I have.
So does he need to spend less time on Facebook and more time helping with the problem?
Oh, look, again, Stuart is obviously, he's like me, born and raised here in Napier, and I know that he is committed to his community. So how he chooses to represent the community is down to him.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. That is the Napier Mayor, Kirsten Wise there. Now, we've sought comment from Minister Stuart Nash, who's the Napier MP, but we haven't yet received a response. Ministers have rolled up their sleeves to have their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine in an attempt to promote its safety. The government's making a public display of its ministers to endorse immunisation and has invited the opposition to join in too. But the vaccine rollout is not without its hurdles. Charlotte Cook reports.
Which arm do you write with?
Right.
Okay, I'll do it in your left arm.
Thank you.
So do you want to pull your sleeve up for me?
I'm not going to watch,
With his sleeve rolled up, Chris Hipkins donned a brave face. Despite not being a fan of needles, he was happy to get the vaccine.
Didn't even feel it. There you go, see? I was expecting a little prick, didn't even feel a little prick, so you did really well. Very steady hand, clearly.
Ministers and spokespeople with health or COVID-19 profiles like Chris Hipkins are getting the jab to show it's safe.
We are doing this as a sign of confidence in the vaccination program, a move of support for those who are working on our front lines who we've been asking for some weeks now to come forward and be vaccinated. We're well through the border workforce now and made a reasonably good start on our frontline health workforce as well.
In the coming months, people like Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the Director General of Health Ashley Bloomfield will also be vaccinated as part of the promotion campaign. As of midnight last night, 63,296 doses have been administered and more than 14,000 people are fully immunised. But it's not been without hiccups, with reports of people showing up for appointments only to be turned away because the centre has run out of vaccine. Chris Hipkins says those issues will be fixed before the program rolls out to the wider community.
We want to get this absolutely right for when we do the big scale up, to make sure that we've got the demand management right. Bookings are an indicator of roughly how many people might get vaccinated in a particular place on a given day, but they're not 100% accurate because you do get some no-shows for bookings, you do get more walk-ups, and trying to understand exactly what the patterns are there means that we can make sure we've got the supply in the right place at the right time.
He says they'll introduce a vaccine courier to ferry doses between centres within a couple of hours to stop them running out. University of Auckland vaccinologist Helen Patoussis-Harris says now is a good time to iron out any wrinkles in the process.
At the moment you're going to see some bumps, and hopefully they're sorted out by the time we expand this, because when it goes quickly, we could be, vaccinating very large numbers every day.
Associate Health Minister Dr Aisha Verrill also had her first dose today. She says they're not focusing on a herd immunity target, instead making sure it gets into all communities.
People don't behave in real life like they do in a computer simulation model, and we don't mix randomly throughout the population. So one of the risks is if we set an average target, but we have subpopulations, part of the country or a particular ethnic community that isn't vaccinated to that level, perhaps we could get outbreaks in that group.
She says the government will have more to say about regional targets and immunisation goals later this week. The ministry confirmed there are no new cases of COVID-19 in the community today, but 2 at the border. Both returnees had been on separate flights from India via the UAE and are not connected to the 12 positive cases from an earlier flight. Health experts have suggested turning off the tap to high-risk countries, but Chris Hipkins has ruled that out. He says the government is reconsidering what facilities it uses, following an array of bungles last week where a COVID-positive returnee was allowed to mingle with others on an exercise bus.
As we go through the process of renewing contracts and so on, we're looking again at, are there things about some of those facilities that make them less suitable to be managed isolation facilities? And one of those things is, if there's not a nearby area where people can get outside and we are having to bus them a reasonable distance, is that something that we'll consider?
More ministers and health workers will be next in line for the shots before moving to the wider community in July. Both Chris Hipkins and Aisha Verrill, now partially immunised, will be back for their second dose in 3 weeks. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Charlotte Cook.
It is 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And after 6 tonight, we'll go live to Wellington, where there is a rally to promote a sexual violence-free city. Some in the Māori legal community are concerned by the High Court's use of tikanga to overrule the Waitangi Tribunal. The High Court has overturned the tribunal's order that $800 million of Crown-owned land in the Central North Island should go to Ngāti Kahungunu. The Crown's argument is that the iwi is not mana whenua of that area. Miriana Johnson has more.
The Waitangi Tribunal very rarely uses its power to order state-owned assets or Crown forestry land to be given back to iwi. But it did just that when it ordered 787 acres of land at Pouakane in the Central North Island to be given to Ngāti Kahungunu, despite the land falling outside of the iwi rohe. Mana whenua of the area Ngāti Raukawa, along with the Crown, took it to the High Court, which ruled the decision was inconsistent with tikanga Māori. Associate Professor of Law at Victoria University and co-president of Te Hungaroia Māori, Cowan Jones, says the Waitangi Tribunal has been ultra-conservative in using this power, so pushback by the Crown is significant.
So it is somewhat concerning that where the tribunal is willing to do that, it seems, or it's at least made a preliminary determination that that's what it's considering, that there are then these other restrictions which are placed on it.
He says the Crown should be held to the same standard.
It seems very convenient for the tribunal to be constrained in the way that it exercises its presumption powers, be constrained by tikanga, where most of the other Crown actions are not at all constrained by tikanga, it seems.
In its decision, the Waitangi Tribunal acknowledged the tikanga issues in relation to mana whenua by making this call. But it placed more weight on a need to remediate treaty breaches, which it says left Ngāti Kahungunu ki Wairarapa Tāmaki Nui Ārua virtually landless. Pouakane, despite being a considerable distance from the Wairarapa iwi, is one of those breaches. European settlers drained the Ngāti Kahungunu Lake Onuke so they could use the land around the lake for farming. To make up for this, the Crown gave Wairarapa Māori the lands around Pouakane. But then government officials decided to build a hydro dam, now the Maraitai power station, so took the land back. Ngāti Kahungunu iwi chair Ngahiwi Tomwana is frustrated the Crown keeps creating a bigger mess to fix its mistake.
It wasn't supposed to be at the expense of other iwi, but the Crown has turned on itself and now it's trying to wriggle or squeeze that decision to death with its own superior self-imposed power.
Lawyer Annette Sykes says the case is complex and raises questions about who has the right to determine the application of tikanga.
And that's where the difficulty comes, because you have a High Court judge and you wonder where his experience in tikanga has been derived from.
She says tikanga Māori should be decided on by specialist knowledge keepers and says the tribunal has the best experience and understanding of this. However, she accepts the High Court does have the power to appeal Waitangi Tribunal decisions, and the Justice has exercised this. She is encouraged by the fact the judgment states that tikanga Māori is law.
I know that tikanga Māori advocates like myself that have always seen the equivalent of tikanga Māori with Pākehā law will be pleased that some of the advocacy of the last 40 years is now infiltrating its way to being part an ordinary part of judgment.
It's unlikely this is the last we'll hear of this case, with talk it could go all the way to the Supreme Court. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson tēnei.
Let's get to some of your feedback now on our earlier interview with All Black great Sean Fitzpatrick. Now, he's backing this potential deal with an overseas investment company, Silver Lake, to buy a 15% share in New Zealand rugby. It is fair to say none of you appear to be sitting on the fence. In fact, you have very strong views on this. Catherine has got in touch to say, I think the All Blacks and their bosses should have pay cuts, big pay cuts. Investment from the USA disgusts me. Peter reckons how much of the Silver Lakes money is going to amateur rugby. None of that money should go to the professionals if there isn't enough money to pay for the professionals. And Lynn reckons the ABs could possibly consider A, reducing their overheads, and B, finding out why grassroots rugby is struggling before they sell out to overseas owners. And this person says, I'd buy rugby bonds if it meant keeping our game in our hands. Some of the players have said they'll block the deal. One of the suggestions they have floated in a letter to New Zealand Rugby is maybe selling bonds to get investment dollars and raise funds so you could buy perhaps a bond in the All Blacks, a share of the team. Would you do it? 2101 or tweet us at checkpointrnz. It's the end of an era this week in Christchurch, with the city's last United Video store shutting down. The New Brighton store has operated for about 25 years and was once among more than 100 United Videos dotted around the country. Christchurch reporter Rachel Graham went along for one last wander down the aisles.
Barbara Drayton is a regular at the New Brighton DVD store. Today she's got a bag full of DVDs in hand, but this time she won't need to return them. They're now for sale rather than for hire. She'll miss the personal touch of a local DVD store.
It's a shame to see it go. It's going to be a bit of a gap in the community, and the lovely Selena downstairs will miss her. And just talk about different movies that you've watched and what you've enjoyed.
Jeremy Lillico works nearby and makes good use of the DVD store, but admits friends think it's odd he still hires DVDs.
They just say things like, I didn't even know there was still video shops around, and I'm sure this is one of the only ones in this part of Christchurch or in Christchurch at all.
He'll miss the visits to the shop with his daughter.
Something family usually, because I watch with my daughter and we like to choose together and things, and it's, we'll miss that. I grew up with it and my daughter's been growing up with it, and it's a pity,
Eilish Bamba Sawyer used to love coming to the DVD store with her friends growing up, but admits she hasn't been in for a while. She was buying up some old-school horror movies and says the DVD store has a better selection than most streaming services.
Some of the older films it's definitely hard to find on the streaming services, especially when it comes down to horror. I know there is a streaming service for horror itself, it's called Shutter. I'm personally not subscribed to that at the moment, but I may have to now with the fact that my DVD stores are closing and I can't get the nice horrors I like anymore.
Darren Scott has owned the New Brighton store since 2001. And says it was a hard decision to shut.
There's some quality people in New Brighton. They can't afford to have a Netflix and a Sky and something else, but they have the affordability to come down maybe once a month and grab a handful of movies for $10 or just a movie for $2 once a week, and that's their source of entertainment.
He says the lack of new releases, due to theatres overseas being shut and film studios not releasing major titles due to COVID-19, has been the death knell for his store. At the end of last year, 3 other United Video stores called it quits, including the Whangamata store. Shelley Hughes ran the Whangamata store for 8 years, but says COVID also put them over the edge.
Everyone learnt how to use the internet if they hadn't already. And the reasons we decided to call it quits when we did was we're not getting the new releases through like we would normally every month, just purely because no one overseas is making them at the moment. So that part of the industry has died.
United Video still has stores in Timaru, Te Puke, Invercargill, Morrinsville and Whangarei. And Christchurch still has Allison Videoland, which focuses on art house movies. Tanya Cooper, who owns the Whangarei United Video, knows they fill a gap for some in her community.
We have a lot of people that live up here that are off the grid and can't afford the internet, don't have, that service at home, so they'll come in and get a whole pile of movies for their family for the week. we're more a public service than a business these days.
Although the future is uncertain, Tanya Cooper hopes they'll continue operating for months, and maybe even for the next year. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, ko Rachel Graham tēnei.
And let's get to some more of your feedback before the news at 6 on, well, the Minister and the Mayor. This is the stoush over Napier. The Mayor reckons they've got a problem with crime there and she needs help. Stuart Nash says nothing to see here. Kevin's got in touch. I'm a Napier resident, said Kevin, and I think that Kirsten Wise has it right. I would believe her comments ahead of Stuart Nash's any day. He certainly knows what BS is all about. Thanks for your feedback, Kevin. Matt has also got in touch to say, talk to some of the ICU nurses that have to deal with opposing gang members in the same ward and having to play mediator at Hawke's Bay Hospital. Lots more feedback on the All Blacks and whether we should sell a chunk of New Zealand rugby to investment firm in the US. This person says, how do you sell your culture and still exist? You don't. Shame, shame, shame on those who are advocating the sale of the All Blacks. Duncan reckons if New Zealand rugby wants to remain central to New Zealand life, they should have the tests on free-to-air TV so the whole community can enjoy the game, not just those who can afford Sky. Another listener says it's wrong to sell our heritage to an international investment company. That is the beginning of the end of determining how our heritage develops in the future. Brian says, rugby, it's just a fun game to watch. They're sounding like it's the end of the world. There are many enjoyable sports to watch. They need to raise some money, let them do whatever is necessary. On the subject of the cows in Cornwall Park, this listener says, the problem with shipping even the best treated animals offshore is the treatment they get when they arrive. We've experienced this before.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihinui ko Susana Leata with DNA. A blunt message has been delivered to Ports of Auckland bosses by an advocate for Māori. A scathing health and safety report released yesterday revealed widespread underreporting of accidents and a culture of fear among workers, many of whom are Māori and Pasifika. Tau Henare, who's an advisor to the Auckland Council on issues affecting Māori, told Checkpoint the buck should stop with those at the top.
It's time for these guys to walk out of the office, get in their flash cars and just bugger off and let somebody who knows what they are doing handle the move into the 21st century.
Tau Henare says that despite promising in 2017 to institute a Māori responsiveness program by 2019, port bosses did nothing about it. The wife of a swimmer killed in a Ports of Auckland incident says she's pleased to see the council has held the company to account by commissioning the health and safety review. Swimmer Leslie Galberger died in 2017 after being struck by a pilot boat. Laura McLeod says it's heartbreaking there have since been 2 more deaths at the ports, and she doesn't want any more families joining such a devastating club. The Mayor of Central Otago is calling on the government to offer some of the newly available MIQ spaces to seasonal foreign workers. In an open letter to ministers, Tim Cadogan says his region's horticulture industry is desperate for workers and letting in foreigners under the RSE scheme would bring huge relief. He says he has seen apple growers reduced to tears because of the strain they're under. MIQ authorities have been urging people to return to New Zealand to snap up a sudden glut of vacancies next month. The former directors of collapsed construction company Mainzeal have failed to overturn a decision they were liable for reckless trading. The Court of Appeal has, however, ruled that penalties of $36 million should not be imposed. Here's business editor Giles Beckford.
The court agrees the directors, Dame Jenny Shipley, Clive Tilby, Peter Grom and the former managing director Richard Yan are liable for breaches of the Companies Act. But it's overturned the original penalties, saying there were no losses from their reckless action. Instead, it says they're liable because they allowed Mainzeal to enter new obligations they had no reason to believe could be met. It ordered the High Court to work out new penalties, which the liquidators say could be higher than the original award. This is Giles Beckford.
An ACC lawyer says many eligible women may be missing out because its policy on the most common type of childbirth-related injury is too restrictive. Successful claims for perineal tears have dropped from about 30 a month to fewer than 4 since ACC began taking a tougher stance last year. ACC says that under the law it can cover only tears resulting from treatment injuries or a failure to provide treatment. But Maria Bagnall, a solicitor at John Miller Law, says this is too restrictive and could put many women off making a claim.
There are many scenarios that women can make a treatment injury claim, and it's an incredibly complex area of law. And what needs to be looked at is the merits of the case itself, not a policy that ACC put out.
Maria Bagnall of John Miller Law. Talks on paying the living wage to some bus drivers in the Wellington region have stalled, prompting the drivers to consider strike action. The Tramways Union has been negotiating with the Regional Council and one operator, NZ Bus. Union Secretary Kevin O'Sullivan says it would have been a significant deal because the living wage of $22.10 an hour is $3 more than what NZ Bus drivers are currently getting. But he says the negotiators failed to reach agreement today, so drivers will meet in 2 weeks to vote on whether or not to strike. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 6. The Highlanders have dropped 6 players for Friday's Super Rugby Aotearoa match against the Crusaders for disciplinary reasons, but they're not saying what the players did. All Black Josh Ioane is among those dropped. Coach Tony Brown says they've broken team protocols but won't elaborate. The 5 New Zealand cities in line to host the 2023 Women's Football World Cup matches will learn overnight whether they have been successful. Finlay Dunseith reports.
Australia and New Zealand will jointly host the 32-team tournament, with 12 cities from both countries having bid to host games. The 64 games will be split between the two countries, with the tournament opener and a semi-final to be played here, while Sydney has already been confirmed as the host city for the final. Football's world governing body FIFA carried out an 8-month survey of each of the 12 candidate host cities, which include Auckland, Christchurch, Dunedin, Hamilton and Wellington. This is Finlay Dunseith.
The White Ferns are on the verge of a T20 series win over Australia, but their otherwise poor form this summer appears to have taken its toll on skipper Sophie Devine. Devine was a late withdrawal from yesterday's nail-biting win over Australia in Napier, suffering from fatigue. With series losses to England and Australia already this season, there have already been calls for her to relinquish the captaincy. Coach Bob Carter says no decision has yet been made on whether she'll play in tomorrow's decider. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, growing juniper berries in New Zealand for a distinctive New Zealand flavoured gin. Massey University Professor Joanne Hort's been doing the science. Simon Morris reviews Godzilla vs. Kong. What could possibly go wrong? Rhymes with Kong. And Chicago-based Kiwi Robbie Ellis on his adventures getting a COVID vaccine stateside. Bit like buying tickets for a World Cup final, he says. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland and Auckland, showers, some possibly heavy and thundery, mainly in the afternoons. Waikato to Manawatu, periods of rain, heavy with possible thunderstorms, easing tonight, but becoming heavier again tomorrow afternoon. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers, possibly thundery, clearing overnight but returning tomorrow afternoon with possible thunder again. Horowhenua, Kapiti, Wellington, Wairarapa, Nelson, Buller and Marlborough. Periods of rain, heavy and possibly thundery falls, clearing from the south tomorrow afternoon. Canterbury, drizzle turning to rain tonight, then clearing from the south tomorrow to fine weather. Otago and Southland, cloud and isolated showers clearing tonight and becoming fine. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, rain tonight north of Hokitika. Chatham Islands cloudy with occasional rain, heavy and possibly thundery tomorrow around midday. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, you're tuned in to Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen Takuingwa. People are gathering in the heart of Wellington's CBD to rally for a city free from sexual violence. For nearly a year, there's been a growing conversation around how unsafe the capital is, with a reported rise in serious violence dating back to August. And a discussion over the threat of sexual violence specifically has ramped up in recent months. Emma Hatton is on Courtney Place and she joins us now. Emma, what's going on down there?
Hi Lisa, well I'm here on Courtney Place in Wellington. This is the heart and soul of Wellington's nightlife, and it's increasingly a place where people who come out at night and even in the day say they feel unsafe. They are here rallying, you'll be able to hear them, they are loud and they are here to demand that the City Council, the government and hospitality venues in this area, all of Courtney Place, Huber Street just up the road from me, do something about making this a safer place for people to come and enjoy their city.
Yeah, quite a lot of people behind you, of people listening rather than watching. And also I see a lot of placards there. Emma, could you just have a wee look over your shoulder and just give us an idea of what they've got written on those banners that they've got? Are there some you can see there?
Absolutely. So there are about 500, 600, 700 people here holding banners, signs that they've been making, things like not asking for it, let us live, stop violence, enough is enough, and what else? Stop gaslighting survivors, believe it when people say they've been abused. Sexual harassment and violence is happening in this city, and these people are here. You can hear them. Sexual violence has got to go.
So what are they actually hoping is going to come from this?
Yeah, so broadly they say that there is a culture change that is required in Wellington. They say there's a culture here that permits and allows sexual violence and harassment to happen in the central city. That's the broad goal. They do have some specific requests here and some specific points that they hope will lead to change. I've written them down because they are important. They want to create and implement a new vision for Courtney Place, Cuba Street and the surrounding areas, make the space more inviting, more accessible, less seedy, less creepy, less available for that kind of behaviour to happen. They also want hospitality staff to have a system, a framework, a policy in place so that across the board, no matter where you go in Wellington, there is a system that can keep people safe from sexual violence and help prevent it. And they also want more funding. They want more investment in sexual violence prevention and more money to go to the organisations that deal with this.
So a really good crowd there and very vocal as well. This is the beginning of the evening. What are they planning for the rest of the night?
Yeah, so they've gathered here on Courtney Place. It's just down from Taranaki Street, and they'll be staying here for the next wee while. There are speeches that are ongoing as we speak. We'll hear from the City Councillor, Tamitha Paul, who looks after the safety portfolio for Wellington City Council. We'll also hear from Marama Davidson. We'll also hear from two university students who started a survey just recently trying to gauge what was actually happening in the city. They had thousands of responses to that survey in just a few days, examples of sexual violence and harassment that people had been experiencing, drink spiking, lewd comments, unwanted touching gestures, things like that, and as far up as actual rape. So they will share their findings of that survey, as well as lots of other people this evening. The organisers here have said this is only the first step in a series of actions that they're planning to take to make the city better for everyone and make people feel safer. So you've heard them here, they are loud and they are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. We will hear more from them.
Thank you, Emma. That is Emma Hatton, who was joining us there from Courtney Place. You could hear the people chanting behind there. Pretty packed, several hundred people chanting Courtney Place, make it safe. The plan to create a new mega public broadcaster is now off ice with a strong signal from the Broadcasting Minister. He wants progress made at pace. Chris Foy announced an 8-person governance body headed by former New Zealand First MP and Cabinet Minister Tracy Martin. Its brief is to develop a business case by mid-year for disestablishing RNZ and TVNZ and creating a new public media entity. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The plan's been a long time in the making, with Labour campaigning on reforming public media in 2017 and over the intervening years morphing into the new media entity. The business case will consider what that would cost to develop, implement and operate, and how it would, quote, collaborate with and complement the work of private media. Former plans set out a timetable for it to be in place by 2023, but Mr Foy isn't putting a date on it.
We put this piece of work on ice. It is off ice now. It is quite a bit of heat on it now to make sure we get it done, because we want to make sure by the end of the year Cabinet has some options available to it.
The new entity would operate with a mixed funding model, drawing part of its revenue from commercial sources and part from government funding. Mr Foy wouldn't go into detail about how that might be split and what the government contribution would have to be. He says both RNZ and TVNZ have been asked to keep a mind to the future.
To make sure that any major decisions that they have in train are made with strengthening public media in mind.
Tracy Martin is a former MP and Cabinet Minister.
I don't have any experience in broadcasting, and I actually don't have a predetermined view, which I think is the other reason I've been brought on. I'm very aware that I answer to Minister Farfoy, and that he has set the parameters and Cabinet has set the parameters.
Chris Farfoy was asked why she was chosen.
Because I work with her and she gets things done.
Tracy Martin says she feels a great deal of responsibility.
Because it's public broadcasting, right? And because of the value that it has inside just the nation as a whole.
Former MediaWorks CEO Michael Anderson is part of the group. He says the creation of a new public media entity must be assessed within the broader media environment.
This has to be viable, and it also has to fit into and help create a sustainable total media industry. It's a small market in New Zealand. It's very important that we get this right.
Government Minister Willie Jackson's also looking at how to better support Māori media. Experienced Māori broadcaster and group member Bailey Mackey says as the public media plan proceeds, it'll be important to make sure it complements existing Māori media. But in the end, it's about the audience.
What we're going to do is build an audience-centric model, put the audience first, regardless of kind of the roads that lead to that. So, if you think about it from the point of view of if we didn't have RNZ or didn't have TVNZ and we were building this from the ground up, what would that look like?
Alongside him is Sandra Kailahi, who's worked in the media, Pacifica media in particular, for decades. She says while there are a number of Pacifica outlets, there would be fresh opportunities within a new media entity.
We're a changing audience as well, and I don't think that we should just be on Pacifica avenues or platforms. It'd be really good to have mainstream so that we can, all of New Zealanders can understand who we are and that we can also tell our stories our way.
The group's expected to report back to the Minister by mid-year and Cabinet presented with options by the end of the year. It's also working on a draft charter. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
It's 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Electricity line charges in some parts of Otago are set to climb over 60% in the next 5 years. That's after the Commerce Commission gave Aurora Energy the go-ahead to spend $563 million to fix and run its network. The infrastructure is in desperate need of upgrades, but as Timothy Brown reports, some are feeling left out in the cold.
Aurora's network, which covers Dunedin, Queenstown Lakes and central Otago, was left in a perilous state after years of underinvestment. The company was fined almost $5 million last year after too many outages between 2016 and 2019. But the company hopes $327 million of improvements will provide a safe and more reliable network. However, some have concerns over how that cost will fall on users. Central Otago and Wanaka's residents face increases of between $380 and $875 a year by 2026, while in Dunedin, where residents already pay less, it'll only rise by between $270 and $540.
In some ways, this is coming to the end of a long battle that we were always at high risk of losing. We're not as badly off as we would have been if Aurora's original proposal had got through, but that's probably pretty cold comfort given how much the increases are. But we need a network that works.
That's Central Otago's Mayor Tim Cadogan. He led the fight to more evenly spread the cost of repairing and improving the network. Mr Cadogan says, as last winter showed, there's no point having lower power prices if there's no power.
The town I live in, Clyde, on the coldest June day we've had in just about forever, minus 10 degrees, the power went out because the network's not up to scratch. And those same, particularly elderly people, I visited elderly people that day who didn't have fireplaces, and they were in dire straits. We were on the point of starting to talk about a civil defence emergency because we were going to have to get people out if the power didn't come back on.
He says a reliable network also brings economic benefits for the district, though it's cold comfort for those facing price hikes. Grey Power Central Otago's secretary, Margaret Lorenz, says it'll mean some elderly residents on fixed incomes will face the choice between leaving the heater off over winter or not being able to pay the bills.
The older ones are going to be affected the most because a lot of them don't have big nesties and they rely on their super and very little else. And even now, some it gets to be a choice about paying bills or eating, or is quite serious for some of them.
Aurora's chief executive, Richard Fletcher, says the company is still working through what the Commission's changes to the company's original proposal will mean for delivering improvements to the network, but it won't compromise on safety.
We recognise that we have some work to do to restore the reputation of Aurora, and the only way that we'll do that is through delivering a safe and reliable network for our customers.
Dr Fletcher says he understands the company has made mistakes in the past and will work to better keep its consumers in the loop. The Commerce Commission's Associate Commissioner, John Crawford, says the region deserves a reliable and safe power supply.
No one wants to live or work in an area where the power supply is unsafe and unreliable, and everyone agrees that the network needs to be fixed, and I think what we've done is provide the funding to ensure that consumers get the reliable and safe network that they deserve, and that's in their best long-term interest to have that network at that stage.
The Commission is now taking feedback on proposals to improve public transparency of Aurora's operations. Tim Cadogan says he'll fight to ensure Aurora is open and honest in how it delivers over the next 5 years, and he'll be calling for the Commerce Commission to help locals understand the process. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Greater Brisbane is waiting to find out whether a 3-day lockdown will be extended over Easter. A hospital connected to one of the region's clusters has been locked down, with reports another health worker and her flatmate have tested positive for COVID-19. The tentacles of the cluster have spread across the border to New South Wales, which will have tighter restrictions in place for the holiday weekend. The ABC's Annie Guest reports.
Her shopping trolley is full, but 46-year-old Celia Walford is not stockpiling.
I don't have the money to do that. I just go by the week. So if we run out, we'll use something else for toilet paper.
She doesn't have a car, so she and her young son are waiting for a ride-share home from the shopping centre at Capera in North Brisbane. Usually, Celia Walford would be at her dog grooming job.
Can't work for this 3 days.
Does it weigh heavily on you?
It is at the moment, yeah. I've got 4 kids plus an extra at home, and they're teenagers, except for this one, so they eat a lot. So, yeah, it's a bit of a worry.
And any holiday plans over Easter that you're now reviewing?
We're going to go camping for a couple of days, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
What about you, Maeve? What do you think about your Easter camping?
That you get to explore.
Exploration is something tourism businesses are desperately hoping people are able to do over Easter. But with growing cases among 2 COVID clusters in Greater Brisbane, people are nervous about their holiday plans, even 1,700 kilometres away in the COVID-free city of Cairns.
We've seen a little bit of concern there, and some cancellations. People are on tenterhooks, waiting to see what happens with the Brisbane lockdown.
Michael Chase Smith is the executive director of Orbit Travel Agency.
I'm fearing for travel agents, and particularly tourism operators and hospitality, and restaurants and cafes in far north Queensland and that sort of thing, that there could be more cancellations.
So what's your advice to those travellers who ring up your agency and question whether they should cancel their plans for those areas outside the lockdown area?
At the moment, we'd say just hold firm for the moment and hope this lockdown doesn't go on any longer.
The ABC's Annie Guest with that report. And Australian studies found a third of people infected with COVID-19 suffer long-term symptoms. Research by doctors at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney show many haven't fully recovered 8 months after the initial infection. And for 20%, symptoms are still severe. The research backs up other studies globally which have found more women than men suffer long COVID symptoms. The ABC's Jane Barden reports.
Derek Young and his wife Gabriella contracted COVID-19 on their way back from France last March. For the 6 weeks that followed, the Sydney holiday rental small business owner was very ill.
I had severe fever, lots of trembling and incredible fatigue. I literally was sleeping 22 hours out of every 24. I also had lots of aches and pain and then brain fog. So I just was very dazed, for want of a better word. I couldn't do my internet banking, so I couldn't pay my suppliers.
He remained very breathless and fatigued for 8 months and still has heart problems.
I've got about 80% plaque in and around the arteries.
His wife, Gabriella, was even worse.
She had severe respiratory issues. She was hospitalised 3 times, and she's still got a lot of those symptoms now.
The couple are among 100 people who got coronavirus, studied by doctors at St Vincent's Hospital over 8 months to establish how many suffer on with what they're calling long COVID. Professor Gail Matthews explains the project has backed up international research, which found women are more likely to experience the ongoing debilitating conditions than men.
We don't know the reason for that yet. There are some conditions that females are more predisposed to, autoimmune conditions. It may be because the women have a different immunological profile.
David Darley is another lead researcher.
32% of patients are still reporting persistent symptoms at 8 months after their infection. And in 20% of patients, they're still reporting major symptoms like shortness of breath, fatigue, or chest pain.
Has that tallied with the results of other people's studies in other places as well?
We're one of the first groups internationally to publish our 8-month follow-up findings. And it does correlate with other research groups that are reporting persistent symptoms.
Have you been surprised by how long these symptoms have persisted?
We are surprised. It's not normal for a viral infection to last this long.
Some patients may have lasting damage.
And they're the patients that are more at risk of having long-term lung injury with lung scarring, and they might have changes in their heart function.
Derek Young is hoping the whole community will take note.
The long-haul symptoms are real, are serious, and when it comes to playing our part as a community, it is important to continue to practice good COVID-safe practices.
Long COVID patient Derek Young ending that report by the ABC's Jane Barden. One of the hugely successful Captain Underpants books has been pulled from shelves after complaints it's racist. Author Dave Pilkey has apologised, saying his story about a kung fu master contains harmful racial stereotypes and passively racist imagery. As the BBC's Charlotte Gallagher reports, he's not the first children's author to find himself mired in controversy.
Now the amazing Captain Underpants! Tra-la-la!
I honestly didn't think that would happen.
Dave Pilkey is one of the world's most successful children's authors. His Captain Underpants series has sold more than 80 million copies and been turned into a film and Netflix series. But a spin-off book published in 2010 called The Adventures of Ook and Gluck, Kung Fu Cavemen from the Future, has been removed from sale and is being taken off library shelves. The decision comes after Billy Kim, a Korean-American father of 2, borrowed the book from a library for his children. But he was furious when he opened it and saw what he called multiple examples of racist imagery and stereotypical tropes. In an online petition, he wrote that every child who had read the book had been conditioned to accept the racist imagery as okay or even funny. In a statement, Dave Pilkey said the book was meant to showcase diversity, equality and non-violent conflict resolution, but now realised it was wrong and harmful to Asian people. He has also pledged the advance and royalties he received for the story to charities that provide books to disadvantaged children and ones that fight anti-Asian prejudice. The move comes amid a surge in attacks on Asian American people in the US, including a mass shooting in Georgia and a number of elderly people assaulted on the street. Dave Pilkey isn't the first children's author to have their work and views criticised. The estate of Dr. Seuss has announced 6 of his books will no longer be published because of racially insensitive imagery, while earlier this year the estate of Roald Dahl apologised for his anti-Semitism and the hurt caused by his comments.
Charlotte Gallagher reporting. And finally tonight, a mother bear has stopped traffic trying to herd her uncooperative cubs, all 4 of them, across a Connecticut highway. CNN's Jenny Moos reports on the unbearable burdens of motherhood. And if you are watching tonight, you will not want to miss this.
Mama bear and 4 cubs stopped traffic in Connecticut trying to cross a road. Mom has her paws full, not to mention her mouth. A 3rd cub crosses. No, make that prances to the other side. 3 across and 1 to go. Uh-oh, the 4th cub is up a pole. Mom to the rescue, but wait, someone's back. It can be a drag wrangling 4 little ones. This is something any human mom can relate to.
Go, babies, go.
Robin Cavelli, mother of 4, shot the video and said of the pole climber in particular,
"He reminded me so much of my son. I could just hear myself yelling, 'Get down off of that pole, get across the street, you're making a scene here.'"
Someone on Twitter posted, "Aw, someone should get out of their car and help." Somebody else put the wise in wise guy by replying, "You want to be mauled? Because that's how you get mauled." Meanwhile, Mom was gently mauling her babies. Robin Cavelli's takeaway?
Just how hard it is to be a mom, and especially 4 babies, and I really felt for the mom.
And just when it seemed all 4 were safely across, one of the cubs made a break for it, crossing the double yellow line. Mom was forced once again to take matters into her mouth as another cub followed in her footsteps. Aww. This is the kind of behavior that inspires lame jokes like, "Why did the bear cross the road to get to the other cub?"
Oh man, I feel for that bear. There were some troublesome bear cubs there. The good thing is all the cars waited patiently. Amazing. Last word to Christina tonight on the All Blacks. In the last decade, our rugby players have increasingly become excellent role models, honest and compassionate in ways unique to the way different cultures are able to operate. I believe only in New Zealand. We need some creative thinking, not just sell out to a bunch of foreign moneymakers. Yes, I would buy bombs to support our national teams. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A blunt message has been delivered to Ports of Auckland bosses in the wake of a scathing health and safety review. Auckland Council advisor Tau Henare says they should, quote, just bugger off. A working group has been given 6 months to develop a business case for Auckland Light Rail. The Mayor of Central Otago is urging the government to offer newly available MIQ spaces to seasonal foreign workers. The Waikato DHB has been found to be systematically failing to meet the needs of Māori and Pasifika. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
Now that is a clear indicator to any objective observer that this is a potentially exploitative situation, and it's hard to understand why that is not being investigated.
Live with local, national and international stories and a slice of creativity.
I've got to say, it's a stunning piece of art. It really is, and I'm not an art person.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I think Susanna Leitao is once again filling in for Karen on Lately tonight after the news at 10. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National after the news at 7. My first guest is Robbie Ellis, a New Zealander living in Chicago, talking about his adventures arranging for a COVID-19 vaccine. Later in this half hour, some audio that's been getting a lot of clicks on the website, which offers you some pointers as to how to exit a conversation. At first, a parliamentary edition of The Detail.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker,
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Prime Minister, does she stand by all...
In particular, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker. The Honourable Grant Roberts.
He's an umpire, a referee, a moderator. He's protected by special rules and he has the power to give politicians their marching orders.
The Honourable Time.
You've done now over a number of weeks, and I got kicked out of the House for it, made personal remarks about members on this side of the House. It's simply not right, and I ask you as a senior member of this Parliament to stop doing it.
Well, I'm going to ask the member to leave the House.
We're speaking to the point of order.
No, there's no point of order. If the member wants a further supplementary, she can take it. If not, we'll move on.
I'm leaving. What a waste.
For how long? Thank you. Oh, Mr. Brownlee, this has got to the point of being ridiculous. The member is Paula Bennett will leave the chamber.
But now Trevor Mallard is facing new accusations.
He basically bullied the person, and we think it's just another example of reprehensible conduct.
He needs to go. He needs to go now.
Today we look at the role of the Speaker of the House with Professor Andrew Geddes. But first, the case that National just won't let go of.
National is calling for Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard to resign after claiming he doubled down on false rape allegations after he was told he was wrong.
The parliamentary staffer at the centre of the claims says the Speaker even went on to threaten him. A defamation settlement cost the taxpayer more than $300,000.
Stuff's senior political reporter Thomas Coughlan takes us back nearly 2 years to the release of the Francis report into bullying and harassment in Parliament.
The whole issue dates back to comments that Trevor Mallard made on the morning of the Francis Review's recommendations being released. He went on morning media, as politicians often do, and he told, I think, first RNZ.
Mallard made the rape allegation in an interview with RNZ on the morning of May the 22nd, 2019.
We're talking about serious sexual assault. Well, that, for me, that's rape.
And then TVNZ, that the report that he had seen, some of the evidence presented in that met a definition of rape. He later repeated that claim on the famous black and white tiles at a press conference in Parliament. So that is where the initial allegation was made.
What happened next?
So what happened next has been pieced together through actually a number of subsequent, episodes in this saga. Trevor Mallard is, as Speaker, the Speaker is the Minister in charge of the Parliamentary Service. So that's the organisation that deals with everything in Parliament, staffing of MPs' offices, stuff like the library, and this staffer as well was an employee. So Trevor Mallard was answering questions in a select committee. A question was asked of Trevor Mallard about this, and Trevor Mallard actually said then that he was told on the day that he made those claims about the staffer that what he was saying then didn't match up with what Parliamentary Service knew. So all of a sudden, on the day that those claims were made, there was a bit of behind-the-scenes stuff going on, which suggested that it was a wee bit messier than the morning media round had presented it. And that kind of was happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the staffer in question left Parliamentary Service, and he currently has an active employment dispute with Parliamentary Service, so that's sort of still ongoing, which limits the ability of actually everyone involved to talk about it. So all of a sudden we've got this very complicated story where we're getting quite different versions of what went on, and obviously because it's such a highly litigious environment, everyone's lawyered up. Getting the truth out of this is actually jolly difficult.
Just to recap, on May the 22nd, 2019, Trevor Mallard made the incorrect claim of rape at Parliament. Later that month, Mr Mallard refused to retract or apologise. On December the 8th last year, Mr Mallard settled the case with a payout and an apology. Then on December the 22nd, he told a select committee meeting that he had realised within 24 hours of making the claims that he was wrong. But National is keeping up the attacks with Chris Bishop leading it.
Chris Bishop. Mr Speaker, what I'm about to say to the House is very important.
So Chris Bishop obviously is, quite a capable lawyer, managed to get the statement of claim and had quite an extraordinary speech in Parliament last week.
I and the National Party believe it is critical that Trevor Mallard resign as Speaker of the House.
Where he essentially set out the facts of the case as National sees it.
The basic facts of what has become known as the Mallard rape affair are, I think, well known.
And the reason why that is so fascinating, it's one of the funny little quirks about being the Speaker, is that you're not allowed to reflect on the Speaker. And what that means is that you can't, in Parliament, say the Speaker's doing a terrible job of being the Speaker.
And Andrew Geddes will explain more on that.
And Trevor Mallard, to his credit, I think, actually let Bishop make the case. When Mallard actually could have thrown Bishop out of the House for it, and Mallard could have, seriously thrown the book at him, but he did not. At the end of that speech, Mallard sort of stood up and said, essentially, that was quite clearly out of order, but I thought it was best to let it run because, the National Party needed to make its point. But he did sort of rather ominously say that at a further Select Committee hearing, which will be in the next couple of months, I think.
I look forward to the hearing of the estimates where the truth will be told.
And I think what's interesting there is that obviously Select Committees, you also have this parliamentary privilege. So it's where Trevor Mallard will be able to speak quite freely about the case because he will be protected from further defaming someone. So he'll be able to lay out the case as he sees it there.
What sort of character is Trevor Mallard? He's the baby-hugging politician, but he's also seems to be very feisty.
Yeah, and I think you've put your finger on the irony there, is that Trevor Mallard has probably done more for Parliament in terms of the culture here than many other speakers have done. Certainly, he's done a lot for families in Parliament. On the other side of things, he does have this record of being, bully's quite emotive language, but he's certainly one of the feistiest MPs that we've had. He famously was involved in a punch-up in a lift in Parliament.
Who was?
Yeah, Tau Henare. So,
yes, I remember that.
Yeah, there aren't many people who can say that they've done both of those things and sort of like gone to war with parliamentary bullying, gone to war with the bad culture in Parliament, whilst also having been literally involved in a fight in a lift in Parliament. So that it's very obvious irony.
So, National really is digging in here.
I think it's probably got a little while to run. Certainly the Select Committee will be interesting, and obviously so long as it's being disputed, it will run.
Let's look at the role of the Speaker. Andrew Geddes is a Professor of Law at University of Otago.
The first thing to understand is that the House of Representatives, which is, the functional part of Parliament, the bit where the members of Parliament all meet and sort of do their business, the House of Representatives runs under its own rules. It has its own things called standing orders, which are rules that the members of Parliament themselves have created, and its own practices and its own ways of doing things. And the House of Representatives cannot be dictated to by any outside body. So, for instance, the courts are not allowed to examine what the House of Representatives does and pass judgment on that. So that then raises the question of who makes sure that the House of Representatives is, following its own rules, and who decides what those rules are and who applies them, and so on and so on. And that role falls to the Speaker. So the Speaker both represents the House of Representatives as kind of their head. So the Speaker literally speaks for the House of Representatives, but the Speaker also, and probably most importantly, acts as the umpire for the internal practices of the House to make sure that the House's rules are being applied, makes decisions about what those rules are and how they apply in any particular situation, and so on.
Who appoints the Speaker?
So when Parliament first meets after an election, there's a process by which nominations are called for. But the Speaker is always a member of Parliament, but it could be any member of Parliament. So names are put forward for people to be the Speaker. If there's more than one nomination put up, there's then an election, and the members of Parliament themselves vote on who they want to be the Speaker. Mostly there's an agreement, okay, there's this one member of Parliament who wants to do the job and everyone's kind of happy for them to do it. And so that's how Trevor Mallard, the current Speaker, actually was chosen.
Is the Speaker chosen because they have certain qualities? Is there something about Trevor Mallard that makes him right for the role of Speaker?
The Speaker is usually a member of Parliament with quite some experience because they need to know how the place works. You wouldn't throw a first-term member of Parliament into that role because, they're still finding their feet. So the Speaker is traditionally a member of Parliament, with a great deal of experience. He can't be a Speaker and a Minister. They have to have either put that behind them, as the case of Trevor Mallard, or accept that it's not going to be something that ever comes their way. Outside of that, really, it's a bit of a black hole. We don't know quite how it's, agreed who will do it. I'd imagine there's a lot of sort of behind-the-scenes negotiation. The government talking to the opposition, would you be happy with this guy doing it? Do you have objections and so on? But that, as I say, is a black hole. All we know is names go forward and then this process is followed.
Would the Speaker always be someone from the governing party?
Usually the Speaker comes from the governing party, but they don't have to. There have been a couple of occasions where an opposition member of Parliament has been put into the Speaker's role. Back then, however, the rule was that if you were Speaker, you didn't vote on matters before the House. And so putting an opposition member up as Speaker basically took their vote out of the picture. That doesn't happen now, that the Speaker votes along with all other MPs on every matter. And so their